Are you tired of the same boring and unhealthy diet of corporate media propaganda and the distraction du jour? Your antidote is here at Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox. Real, revolutionary, and relevant news and talk with fascinating and brilliant guests. Prepare to be informed and motivated with your friend and host, Cindy Sheehan.
Welcome back to the Soapbox. I'm your host, Cindy Sheehan. This week we have a super important edition of the Soapbox. We will be chatting with Mnar Muhawesh. Mnar is the founder and the managing editor of MintPressNews. MintPressNews is based out of the Twin Cities, and she's been on the ground there in South Minneapolis almost since the beginning of the police murder of George Floyd. So we'll be chatting with her about her on-the-ground observations and the observations of institutional racism and poverty and militarism in the United States. Stay tuned and we'll be right back with Mnar. Mnar Muhawesh, welcome back to Cindy Sheehan Soapbox.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I know you've been really busy, and I know you've been on the front lines in the Minneapolis uprisings, against the police murder of George Floyd. And I just want to also tell you that I've been thinking a lot about you lately.
Thank you.
Because you're, first of all, doing that, but my last week's show was called Don't Forget Palestine. And so I'm sure you see a lot of similarities between what Israel does in Palestine and what's happening here in the U.S. now.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. The police in the United States are completely out of control, and they're receiving their training from the apartheid state of Israel. So it's no wonder they've taken such an aggressive and atrocious approach towards policing Americans.
I just heard, and I was just trying to confirm it before I called you, that the lawyer for the Floyd family has said that they will be arresting the other three officers.
Yeah, so it sounds like Keith Ellison has taken over the case as prosecutor,
right.
And there was a lot of push by the community in South Minneapolis to get Keith Ellison on the case. He had promised he was promising the family and the community to ensure that all of the officers involved in the killing of George Floyd would be prosecuted and charged with murder, not just the one cop that was kneeling on his neck, which was Derek Chauvin, but he would actually bring to justice the other three officers that were standing by who did absolutely nothing to stop the murder from happening.
Do you think the arrest of the other three officers will help quell the discontent, the social unrest?
You know, I think it will play a role in helping some people find peace. However, I think it's important to know and for people to understand that these protests are not just about the killing of George Floyd. And,
right.
First, we have to keep in mind that, we live in a system and in a country where it took an entire 4 or 5 days for the first officer involved in this case, in this murder, to even be arrested from his house. It took 4 days of unrest. I mean, Cindy, if you or I were to go and behave like this cop would, we would be arrested and, prosecuted on the spot, right?
Right.
So people are outraged that it took 4 days just to arrest Derek Chauvin. And now it's taking even, a couple more days to arrest these three other officers. So that's one aspect that we can look at this from, is that it took time for people to find that little bit of justice. But the overall message from these uprisers, from these people that are protesting, is not just about George Floyd. He was the trigger. He was the trigger for a greater frustration and anger towards an entire system that has left these people out left to starve. I mean, for the last 3 months, Americans have been under quarantine.
Right.
And this has meant that, 40 million Americans filed for unemployment. And I was on the streets with these people. I was interviewing them. I was meeting with them, talking with them. I was live streaming for MintPressNews on our Facebook page. And every single person that I had talked to was so frustrated with the economic situation that the country is facing. So while 40 million Americans were facing unemployment, we had just filed for unemployment, we saw record profits for America's billionaire class.
Right.
This is a community of billionaires that make up less than 1% of the population. Literally less than 1,000 billionaires run this country. People like Jeff Bezos, Michael Bloomberg, and others.
Bill
These
Gates.
guys.
We can't forget Bill Gates and all this.
Yes, and Bill Gates.
Yeah.
And Bill Gates, he's an American billionaire, part of that class. This group of billionaires reaped their largest profit in U.S. history, the largest profit for billionaires.
$500 billion in like 3 months. Another massive transfer of wealth from people who were already on the bottom. We saw during the Obama administration that the gap between the poor and the wealthy just grew astronomically. But this must be unprecedented, this transfer of wealth.
Yeah, I mean, this was the largest transfer of wealth, like you said, in the history of this country, all while the largest gap between rich and poor in this country was taking place. And then on top of that, this was the past 3 months is also the time when the largest stimulus package was given to corporations in U.S. history. So there's no doubt that during this crisis, during this pandemic, this global pandemic, the United States and its elites and its oligarchy saw it as an opportunity to reap wealth. And so these people are so frustrated, they're frustrated by a total socioeconomic system that discriminates against them, that leaves them out to starve, literally starve. I mean, we've seen images of food banks and bread lines in the United States that have gone, in some states, miles long.
Right. People standing in hours. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the richest country on earth. I mean, I know that the grocery stores are really empty right now as well. I mean, this is America. We'd like to think that we are this rich country, but in fact, when it comes to these people that are protesting, they see it much different.
Well, also, I don't really understand what the elite or whatever thought that was going to happen. Maybe they knew this was going to happen, but like you said, 40 million people out of work. Schools are closed. The high schools, colleges. So there's been no outlet for people. The gyms are closed. No sports, no concerts, no park. Playgrounds are closed, so there's no outlet. And then it's like, to me, it looks like the Rodney King verdict. It's like you said, it's just a spark. It's not the reason. It's just a spark that sparks this off. But besides this 3 months of, the lockdowns, there's hundreds of years of systemic racism in this country. Absolutely.
And that's why one of the most iconic images that came out is one of the historic building where a slave market was still intact. I believe it was in Georgia that went down in flames.
Wow. So tell us your experiences. You've been on the ground covering this, ever since it began. Maybe about the time in South Minneapolis when the protest was peaceful. And from what I understand, then the cops started tear gassing and shooting people with rubber bullets. And then there was much evidence that a white cop started smashing windows at the AutoZone that kind of became the flashpoint, if we want to say.
Yeah, so let me start from the beginning. I actually went down the second day of protests, and from what I saw, the majority of the protesters were absolutely peaceful. They were unarmed. They were marching, asking for justice. They were yelling out, "I can't breathe," "Black Lives Matter." dismantle the police state, dismantle the police. And so they were just demanding justice for George Floyd's killing. And when I went down to South Minneapolis, I mean, I was completely amazed and I was really inspired because I saw an entire community come together for the cause of George Floyd. And everywhere you turned in Minneapolis, everywhere from North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, all the quarters of Minneapolis, even businesses had signs that said, "I can't breathe, justice for George Floyd." And these signs were, they were all over the Twin Cities and going into St. Paul and also into the suburbs. And I think that just showed that, that viral video of George Floyd really struck a chord with so many Americans, so many Minnesotans. And so we saw an organic uprising among the community, and they came together. And then I believe it was the second night or the third night, we saw the first images of an AutoZone get lit up into flames.
Right.
And an image came out, the protesters, they've been really good at kind of identifying who's been provoking and instigating more violence in the crowd. And now, I have to be honest, we still have not confirmed if it is this police officer at St. Paul.
Right.
But it really is highly likely that it could be the case. But there's imagery that have come out with this man holding an umbrella and lighting up the AutoZone in the 3rd precinct on fire. And then, all across the country, we're seeing other instances where the police are provoking the violence. Protesters will appear on scene, and all of a sudden there's these like stacked up bricks almost ready for them, almost placed there for them to start smashing windows. And then there's images of police actually destroying property and targeting people. There have been viral footage of police ramming through protesters with their SWAT cars or their squad cars. There have been images of police breaking windows at Target. A scene where there are no protesters. Why are they breaking it? Why are they breaking the glass at Target? It's almost as if they want to make it appear that the protesters are looting, just to kind of fuel that flame about the looting narrative. And then I also have been finding videos and footage of police going up to cars of family and children and either shooting at them or breaking their windows. I saw this not last night, but the night before. I took a break yesterday, but the night before, I was live streaming for MintPressNews on Facebook, and I watched police. I watched them at 11 o'clock at night. It's pitch black outside. They don't have the roads closed. Cars are driving through near downtown Minneapolis. They have no idea the police are in front of them, and the police just start shooting at every single car that's passing by. This happened right in front of me, and you can find that footage on MintPressNews Facebook page on the last live stream that I did. And they shot at a car with a family in there. There's children in there. They completely shattered the glass. People, I mean, it's as if they didn't close the road because they're kind of like inviting these people to get closer, while these people have no idea that police are right in front of them because it's pitch black. And then I believe one of the drivers that had driven close to the police in that instance was also a journalist, and the rubber bullet not only shattered the glass, but it hit his eye.
Wow.
So a lot of instances where police are provoking a lot of the violence and destroying property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So the charges, let's talk about the charges against Chauvin and, the potential charges against his accomplices. Third-degree murder, people were like, what even is third-degree murder? Minnesota actually happens to be one of the only states that has third-degree murder, right?
Yeah, people want Chauvin and they want the officers to face murder charges for manslaughter, where that means that the officers purposely killed George Floyd. And that's because he had been crying out for over 7 minutes, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And he was making it and he was struggling. He was towards the end, he was choking up. He couldn't even talk anymore. And he started crying for his mama. He was calling out for his mama, which was the saddest part. Right. So it was clear that the officers knew what they were doing. This is not a tactic to subdue him. They knew that he was going to be killed.
Right. Well, I think also that over 8 minutes of him, begging for his life, that at some point it could have been stopped and aid could have been rendered. So it's almost like first-degree murder at that point. It's maybe they didn't go out to kill somebody that day, but they certainly had enough time to not kill him.
Exactly. And we have the case of Eric Garner from just about 6 years ago. I mean, his famous dying words were, "I can't breathe." And I think that's why, and that sparked an entire movement, right? His killing sparked an entire movement that spread all across Ferguson and Baltimore and across the nation, where President Obama ended up authorizing the National Guard and discharging the National Guard all over the country. And so we're in a very similar situation, but I think this time the frustration is even more, just because of the last 3 months of income inequality and just how desperate Americans have become to put food on their tables.
This is a little bit of a, off the subject, just a tiny bit, but there was a protest here in my town, Vacaville, which is a very conservative town. We're right next door to one of the biggest Air Force bases in the world, U.S. Air Force bases. We have 2 prisons. We have a state prison and a medical facility here. So it's very conservative, very pro-military, very pro-police overall. And so Sunday we had a protest. I had a few hundred people. And so then all of a sudden people here are very concerned that there's going to be looting. And so people started getting police scanners on their cell phones, and people actively had to stop listening because they were hearing so many cases of attempted suicide because of the place we find ourselves in right now. They just couldn't take all the calls for attempted suicide.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to see people, even in the communities where I live in, the suburbs of Minneapolis and across the country, that come from more conservative backgrounds. It's so easy for them to just kind of paint, one stroke of a brush with that all these protesters and all over the country are looters, or they're rioters, or they're painting them as rioters. They need to get on the ground and see how these people are living and get a reality check of how the rest of the country is living.
Right. Here in a conservative suburb, we're kind of like between Sacramento, San Francisco, Silicon Valley. We have a big pharmaceutical company here in town. So we're not poor. There is poverty and there is a lot of homelessness, as in every state, but to hear the desperation of the suicides, kind of gave a lot of people in this community a wake-up call that we're not some kind of protected enclave here in the hills at all. But another thing that is interesting to mention about this George Floyd case is that Amy Klobuchar is implicated in him still even being a cop, Chauvin even being a cop. Can you talk a little bit about that? She is your senator.
Yeah, she's a senator here. She's running for president. Joe Biden is considering her to be a vice president, which goes to show who the Democratic Party is choosing to lead us. So there are people who are complicit in police killings of these innocent people and these unarmed people. But yeah, Amy Klobuchar, between the years of 1999 and 2007, she was the acting prosecutor in the state of Minnesota. And she, the case of this cop, Derek Chauvin, he had actually killed, I believe it was 3 other people. And his case was brought to her table, to her desk. And she dismissed him. She ensured that the justice was not brought to the families and to these people. Instead, that she let this killer cop free. And this is who Joe Biden wants to be vice president. Not that we can trust anything that Joe Biden is going to pick, but Joe Biden himself. But I mean, these are the people that come from the Democratic Party. We'd like to think police brutality or issues of U.S. militarism and whatever it may be that this, corruption is coming always from Republicans. But in fact, it's a two-party system that acts at the behest of the military industrial complex. And that trickles all the way down to situations and cases like allowing these killer cops to walk free and showing them that there is no accountability.
Right. And it's not an isolated incident like we've been talking about. It's
Right.
pretty commonplace. So we have these cops that, are arrested. They will probably go to trial. We saw in Los Angeles that it wasn't so much the incident, the Rodney King incident was terrible enough, but it was when they got exonerated for that, when the city lit up. And not just the city, but all across the country, there were protests against the Rodney King verdict.
And do you know how things quieted down after that? I can't remember. Like how
I think, well,
yeah.
I was just right there in Los Angeles when all this was going on. I think it just kind of fizzled out.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, and I wish that I had done more research before I brought it up, but were the cops, maybe there was some federal prosecution or the civil cases. There were civil cases against the cops at Rodney King. It was like the O.J. Simpson verdict, when he was exonerated, but then the family sued him. So
well, and you know what? I think no matter what the outcome will be, one thing is very clear is that the Trump administration right now, with the support, as much as Democrats might speak out now against him, they are in full cahoots with Trump, with Trump's decisions to bring out the National Guard and the military. I think, using that brute force is either going to have two responses, which is going to be, it's going to enrage. Yeah, it's going to enrage people even more and encourage them to get more on the streets, or it's going to end up fizzling things out because of just how traumatic bringing the military and having the National Guard. Because now even Trump gave authorization for the National Guard to use the governors did, to use live ammo against the protesters.
Right. Well, you know what happened in Kent State when the National Guard killed the 4 students at Kent State in Ohio? It really demoralized and scared people from protesting. So there was a lot of like outrage and let's fight back against that. But a lot of people were like, oh, this is too real. Crap just got real here. So
yeah, and yesterday, I'm sure you saw this, a video of Anderson Cooper went viral where he was.
I didn't. Oh, tell me.
Okay, you have to see this video, Cindy, because a video of him on CNN, kind of, full of heart and sympathy and compassion for the protesters, he was just calling out Trump, that this is America. We don't send out the troops and the military, and you don't have the authorization, and we need to get to the bottom of this police brutality and systematic racism. And I was just watching him, and I was like, where the hell has Anderson Cooper been and all the Democrats been? I know, where have they been for the last, I don't know, like 15 years under the Bush administration, under the Obama administration, the Trump administration? When Trump and Obama and Bush were authorizing the military overseas, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Mali, and across Africa. So we see a lot of hypocrisy, and in fact, it's showing the true colors of these kind of Democratic Party aligned people and figures, where they are openly saying and showing that, we don't bring the military here in America on the streets because it's not okay. We need to protect the lives of Americans, but we're totally okay in authorizing military overseas to terrorize people. Those people's lives don't matter. So all this bullshit about, talking about systematic racism and humanity, it's all BS, because if they really truly believe that, they would be preaching that about all people around the world.
Absolutely, 100%. So,
sorry, I got kind of angry at that.
No, I don't blame you. I've been posting that kind of stuff on my wall too. It's truly chickens coming home to roost if they're going to start putting troops here on the streets of the United States. But it's like all these virtue signalers is that's not good. That's not right. You don't put, but they're not out there protesting. And I said yesterday on Facebook, maybe like after all this settles down, we can have a real anti-imperialist movement and recognize that these lives matter too, the lives of the people that the U.S. are oppressing and killing all over the world. But another thing Trump could do if he wanted to like quell this, this unrest, these feelings of desperation, is instead of saying, I'm going to call out the police, he could say, I mean, not the police, the military, he could say, let's investigate this, let's arrest those officers, and if you won't do it, the Justice Department will do it, because the Justice Department can, because of the civil rights legislation back in the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is tweeting out insane remarks, like genocidal remarks against his own people here in the United States. I mean, I was just on his Twitter feed before we started talking, and one of the tweets that caught my attention is, not that it's surprising, of course, is, let me find it here. New York City, call up the National Guard. These lowlifes and losers are ripping you apart. Act fast. Don't make the same horrible and deadly mistake you made with the nursing homes. I mean, he's literally calling almost like for a genocide to take place against the American public. And that's who the president is. That's who our president, that's who's leading us right now. Right. And in fact, and you make a good point. What if justice was called from the very beginning? We'd be seeing such a different response from people, but Americans are so tired of the system. Look who our president is. It's so disgusting.
And look who our choices were going to be. Yeah,
I was going to say he's just he's the wolf. The Democrats are the sheeps over the wolves closing.
It's really crazy. Well, Mnar, I know you're really busy, and we really appreciate your time. Is there something you'd like to add? And we really appreciate MintPressNews so much.
Well, I appreciate you having me on and advocating and supporting for MintPress. I think it's really important that people tune into independent media, because we're going to be the ones who are going to be asking these tough questions and holding the establishment accountable. Whereas even organizations like CNN, where they have Anderson Cooper pretending to care about, Black lives and systematic racism, they're still going to frame the situation as violent rioters. Right. And I just want to leave on this last note. This was missed during that viral arrest of CNN journalists and producers. That video of CNN journalists getting arrested in Minneapolis. Right. At the very, very end of the video, the producer asked the officer after asking him several times, "Why are you arresting us? Why are you arresting us?" At the very end, he says, "Why are you arresting us? We're here to show that you guys are bringing order." Watch that video. Mm-hmm. Watch it. Listen to what he says. Watch it till the end. That goes to show that these mainstream outlets, and this is not like an isolated incident, these mainstream outlets are not working to show the truth on the ground. They're there to frame stories a certain way. And I'll leave it at that.
Oh, I just want to say, if it weren't for all of the horrible crap you have to go through to even fly, I'd be there with you guys right now. Well, but that. You know that I am with you. My heart's with you, and just we need you. So stay safe. We need you. Your boys need you. So stay safe while you're out there.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you so much.
That's it for this edition of the Soapbox. I am super jealous of Mnar, not because of what's happening, that this unrest and the racism and everything happened, but that she is there on the ground. I wish in these days of the COVID lockdowns that I could also be. But hey, here in Vacaville, the young people have been doing some very good things, protesting the cop killings. So I'd like to thank my engineer Don DeBar. I'd like to thank Mnar for the extraordinary work she's doing. there in the Twin Cities. I'd like to thank you for listening to the Soapbox. I am Cindy Sheehan. You have been listening to the Soapbox. Peace out for now, and also solidarity.